Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1993 to take a look at the fifth studio album by British punk, post-punk, new wave, and MTV icon, Mr. Billy Idol. The album in question is, of course, the notorious Cyberpunk. Now, I think to truly understand the impact that this record made, both in pop culture and on the career of Billy Idol himself, I think it helps to go back to April of 1990, when Billy Idol released his fourth studio album, Charmed Life. Now, at the time, in 1990, Charmed Life was Billy Idol's most successful record to date. The success of the record, of course, was largely driven by the popularity of the music video for the album's first single, Cradle of Love. Now, I totally understand the popularity of the song. Based on the music video, it was definitely hot. It was very strokeable. I'm a guy who enjoys a nice piece of carpet as much as anybody else. And certainly Betsy Lynn George was arguably one of the best MTV divas back in the late 80s and early 90s. But that being said, apart from the video, the question I've always asked about Cradle of Love was, is the song really that remarkable without the music video? Now, I would argue that it's not. In fact, I would make the argument that Billy Idol's 1990 record, Charmed Life, is, at least in my opinion, the weakest of his entire catalog, apart from his Christmas record, which is nothing nice either. I mean, I'm biased. I'm not really, a big Christmas music person anyway. But, I would make the argument that Charmed Life, as far as the actual studio records of Billy Idol's career, is easily, in my opinion, my least favorite. I don't even own a copy of it at this point in time anymore because I never listened to it. It was a record I got very little enjoyment out of, especially over the years. If you go through and you look at the tracks on Charmed Life, I have them written down. Like I said, I don't own the record physically anymore because there's no point in me owning something I absolutely never listened to. But the opening song on the record is called Loveless. To me, that song is okay. The next song after that is Pumpin' on Steel. I never liked that song. The third song is Prodigal Blues. I think that song is pretty decent. It was probably the best song on the record. I do remember there was a music video for Prodigal Blues. The Billy Idol's cover version of LA Woman by The Doors I thought was passable. I actually really liked the video for that song too. That was probably, of the videos for Charmed Life, that was probably my favorite of the videos. The next song after that was called Trouble with the Sweet Stuff, which I absolutely hated. That's probably, if it's not my least favorite Billy Idol song of all time, it's definitely close. The next song is called, the next song after that, of course, was Cradle of Love, which was, the song that was really the engine that drove the popularity of that record. Again, it was based mostly, in my opinion, on the music video. You could always tell when one of your classmates, I was in high school when Charmed Life came out, you could always tell when one of your classmates had seen the new Billy Idol video because he came to school and he had the one, buffed arm. You're like, oh yeah, you saw the Cradle of Love video. Are you kidding me, man? I didn't leave my room for 2 weeks. Again, as a song, it's probably one of Billy Idol's biggest hits, if not his biggest hit as a single. But as a song, it's not anything super remarkable. The next song after that is Mark of Cain. I think it's generic on its best day. Endless Sleep is pretty rough. The Right Way, to me, and I don't say this as a compliment, but to me it sounds like, kind of Dokken or sort of Warranty. It's sort of a bad, hair metal kind of sound. There's a song called Love Unchained, which is okay. One of the better songs on the record, not without its charm. The song called License to Thrill, to me, which sounds like it's trying to kind of pull off a U2, Bullet the Blue Sky type of sound. To me, Charm Life was bland. It was boring. By this point in time, Billy Idol had moved on from Steve Stevens, who I think Steve Stevens is as integral a part of Billy Idol's solo sound as Billy Idol is himself. The guitarist that he employed on both Charmed Life and Cyberpunk, was somebody named Mark Younger Smith. Now, to me, Steve Stevens always had a very distinct sound. He had an energy. Like I said, he was as big a part of the Billy Idol solo sound as Billy Idol was himself. Now, you bring in a guy like Mark Younger Smith, who is very bland, very generic. He sounds like every boring, session player. He's got that sort of tinge of vanilla blues, which I really don't like much. Another thing that really benefited Charmed Life as a record, in my opinion, was that it came out, a year before Nevermind. Now, in September of 1991, of course, Nirvana released Nevermind. That completely altered the musical landscape. I think it's easy for younger people, or even people of my age sometimes, to forget just what a line of demarcation Nevermind created. You think to yourself, I think to myself, had Charmed Life come out maybe a year after it did, in the kind of build-up to the grunge revolution, would it have been as successful as it was? I believe absolutely not. In fact, I even believe that the Cradle of Love video, which of course is iconic, I think by 1991, by the end of 1991, that video would have been seen as tacky and passé. And I think by the end of 1991, it was seen as tacky and passé. So at this point in time, we fast forward now to June of 1993. We are now in the height of the grunge revolution. I mean, if you weren't from Seattle, if you didn't have dirty hair, if you weren't wearing jeans that smelled like 8 miles of ass, you were basically, nowhere. That was it. Everything else was dead. There was a mandate, not only from music fans, but from the industry, that, everything else was, archaic. Everything else, no longer existed. There was not any, you couldn't be any less cool to be somebody like Billy Idol. Memos were circulated. We had to sign waivers. You had until midnight to turn over all of your warrant and Tesla paraphernalia to your local police precinct. So in 1993, what Billy Idol decides to do at the height of the grunge revolution is buck that trend and decide to go in a completely different direction and release his 5th studio album, Cyberpunk. Of course, as I mentioned, coming off of a huge success with his 1990 album, Charmed Life. Now, I think one thing about this record, now whether you like this record, whether you don't like this record, whether you think this record is a joke, one thing I've always admired about this record is the fact that Billy Idol decided to move in the complete opposite direction of what was popular at the time. Now, you can't really argue that Billy Idol should have gone out and made a grunge record. That would have been as poorly received, in my opinion, as Cyberpunk ended up being. There was another record that came out around the same time that I've always sort of compared to Cyberpunk in a way. Now, there are similarities and there are dissimilarities, but it also reminds me of the U2 record Zooropa, which was released just a week after the Cyberpunk record came out by Billy Idol. And what is interesting is these were two established bands from the 80s, very ultra successful, two bands that were not going to go along with the grunge hype. These were two records that I think really, sort of thumbed their nose at what was coming out of Seattle. And I really admire the fact that both of these records, although they had very different commercial, appeal, I'm certainly not going to compare Cyberpunk to Zooropa in terms of its commercial performance. Zooropa, of course, Cyberpunk turned out to be a tremendous, flop, whereas U2 scored a relatively decent-sized hit with Zooropa. And of course, you can't compare, U2 to Billy Idol in terms of their popularity or their level of success. U2, of course, at the time were riding very high on their ultra successful Zoo TV tour, which I've always sort of maintained was one of the biggest, whether you're a fan of U2 or not, it was one of the biggest rock and roll events, at least of my sort of, youth. Everybody was into Zoo TV. You couldn't escape it. I was sort of a little bit young and not really interested in U2 at the time, so I missed out on the Zoo TV thing, but at the time you really couldn't, escape it. It was the biggest thing in the world. U2 were the biggest band in the world, so, to compare Cyberpunk to Zooropa now seems kind of silly. And of course, I would make the argument that, these two records, I think that Zooropa it's a better record. But that being said, I don't think there's a single song on the Cyberpunk album which is as bad as the song Numb by U2. Another thing about this record, and of course this record was just a commercial disaster for Billy Idol, but one thing that was funny, it's not really funny, I guess, but if you go back and you look up old reviews of this record now, at the time this record came out, I was just sort of starting to get into Billy Idol. So I remember when these reviews were coming out, and they were something to really, behold. Of course, all of the music critics at the time had all bought in on Seattle. Grunge was king. As I mentioned, everything else was dead. Everything else was living in the past. And it almost seemed like it became, competitive between music critics as to, who could go the most over the line in attacking Billy Idol. I mean, they got personal, on this record. As far as I'm concerned, my personal relationship with this record goes back to right around the time it came out. Not long after this record came out, I first discovered the music of Generation X. Now, of course, I'd been familiar with Billy Idol, all of my life as a young kid, seeing him on MTV and everything. But at the time, around this time, I discovered the music of Generation X, who became, my favorite band of all time. I was obsessed with Generation X for several years, right around this era in the mid-1990s. As an extension of that, Billy Idol was my favorite artist. And this is a record that, to me, is very sentimental in the sense that this was a record that I found myself talking about all the time back in those days. Now, this is a record now I would say is probably somewhat forgotten unless you are a diehard big-time Billy Idol fan. Like I said, at one point in time, Billy Idol was my dude. Generation X was my favorite band. And, a lot of people back in those days, when I was really into Generation X and Billy Idol, this was one of the conversations I had more than anything else with people who were in the know of Billy Idol. Of course, the record was still semi-relevant back then. You could make the argument maybe the record was never hugely relevant to begin with. But when this record was still relatively new, this was a record that people loved to give me grief over. They loved busting my balls over. At the time, of course, I loved Billy Idol. I was very biased. I was very partial in my opinion. So I always, at the time, I thought this record was really great. I told people as much. This was something that I defended with every breath I had. This record became one of my hills that I was willing to die on. Now, at this point in time, 30 years later, this record just will turn 31 years old this year. It's crazy to think about how long ago that was. At this point in time, I'm still a huge Billy Idol fan. I'm a huge Generation X fan. When it comes to Cyberpunk, I don't listen to this record very often at all. In fact, I just listened to it twice this week because I wanted to do a video on it. And it was interesting to go back and listen to it through sort of a different set of ears than I used to listen to this record with, because I was so into Billy Idol and Generation X that I loved this record. Like I said, even some of the stuff on this record, which is really kind of cringe, listening to it now, was stuff I really liked. At the time, I thought that this record didn't really have much bad on it at all. And I've always thought, even back then, it was way better to me than Charm Life, which, like I said, to me is Billy Idol's, my least favorite of his solo records, or any of his records, really, apart from the Christmas record. Anyway, as I mentioned, this record came out on June 29th, 1993. It was produced and engineered by Robin Hancock. This album was recorded in Billy Idol's home studio in Los Angeles. I think that this record does have some pretty decent songs on it. There is definitely a significant amount of clunkage. Generally speaking, I'm not really the biggest electronic music person in the world, at least this style of electronic music. I don't necessarily love the production on it. I think that especially some of the techno elements, to me, sound a little bit tinsely. And as I mentioned with Charmed Life, this record also features Mark Younger Smith on guitar, somebody whose guitar playing I've never really been a fan of. I just, especially compared to Steve Stevens, who I am a huge fan of. And I thought that Mark Younger Smith, his guitar playing was sort of, chintzy sounding on Charm Life. There are elements on Cyberpunk where his guitar playing is just almost intolerable, especially when you mix that kind of like wannabe, vanilla blues rock with elements of electronic dance music. There's just something it doesn't really fit. And there are points on this record also where, Billy Idol, who I love Billy Idol's voice, I always have. There are elements on this record, there are points on this record where his voice doesn't work. But generally speaking, as I was listening to this record this past week, again, I listened to it twice this week. I haven't listened to it in a while. I haven't really decided how I feel about it as of yet. So as I go through the tracks, I'm going to put the songs into two different columns. One column being yes and one column being no. And as we go along, as we reach the end of this video, which I know can't come soon enough for you, we'll decide together if this record is more or less on the good side. The first song on this record is a song called Wasteland. I actually kind of like this song instrumentally. It's a little bit more interesting than a lot of the music on this record. But this is, as I mentioned earlier, there are songs on this record that Billy Idol's voice does not work with. I would make the argument that Wasteland is one of those songs. Like I said, that's kind of a reoccurring theme throughout the record. And, you know, a lot of this record wouldn't be complete without some of Mark Younger Smith's extra cheesy guitar riffage. Makes you miss Steve Stevens. I mean, I missed Steve Stevens on Charmed Life as well. One of the questions I asked myself repeatedly as I was listening to this record this past week was, could Steve Stevens have saved this record? Would it have been better with Steve Stevens? Of course, he and Billy Idol at the time were separated. I don't even think they were really on speaking terms. And I sort of have the feeling that Steve Stevens, even if he and Billy Idol were working together at the time, he wouldn't have wanted much to do with this record. Maybe he may have even talked Billy Idol out of making this record. So as far as the yes and no columns on this for this album, I am afraid Wasteland is going to have to be a no. The second song on this record is the first single. It is called Shock to the System. And man, I really don't like this song at all. Even in my most diehard Billy Idol defending days, back in the mid-90s when this record was out, this was a song I just never liked. This is a song that, of course, was the first single. There was a video for this song which was pretty rough as well. If you go back, you can find it on YouTube. I used to have it on VHS, but there was a documentary, a little featurette documentary with Billy Idol about the making of the video for Shock to the System. And really, apart from the fact that the song is not very good, the video itself had all of the, pieces to the recipe that should have made it a very iconic music video. It was directed by Brett Leonard, and special effects were provided by the legendary Stan Winston. But man, the video is terrible as well. There's as I said, there's a sort of a mini documentary about the making of the video for Shock to the System. And if you go back and you watch that, of course, this was all filmed before the record came out. And as you watch the video, in hindsight, recognizing what an absolute and utter flop Cyberpunk was going to turn out to be commercially, you kind of can't help but feel really bad for Billy Idol during the whole making of the video for Shock to the System, because you get the feeling watching it that he's really excited about this project. I believe wholeheartedly that Billy Idol really was proud of this record before it came out and before it kind of like blew up in his face. And as you watch the making of documentary for the Shock to the System video, he and Brett Leonard and Stan Winston all seem to be very excited about the project. Man, that video is rough. I don't like the song at all. I will say, ironically, the one thing about that song that I do kind of like, even though I've just spent the last 15 minutes bashing the guy, is I actually do kind of like the guitar playing on that particular song. So I will give Mark Younger Smith credit for at least the guitar playing on Shock to the System. Now, if you ever go see Billy Idol live at this point in time, which I've seen Billy Idol many, many times over the years, he is incredible live to this day. I'm still a huge fan. So if you haven't had the opportunity to go see Billy Idol, who, by the way, was the person who originally inspired me to bleach my hair way back in the early 90s. So we've got to give credit where it's due, or blame where it's due. Ironically, this is the only song from Cyberpunk that I think Billy Idol plays live at this point in time. I think it's the only song I've ever seen him play live from this record. To me, it's probably the weakest song on the record. So for me, unfortunately, that is a no. The next song after that is Tomorrow People. I think the song is pretty okay. It's kind of like a tiptoe through a sort of post-apocalyptic landscape, which, isn't really described super well. It sort of makes me laugh. The opening line of the song says, "A time warp scene, a sci-fi story." Well, of course it's sci-fi. This is a concept album. This is a futuristic science fiction concept album. Makes me think of one of my favorite books of all time, which is Moby Dick, which, if the opening line of the book Moby Dick were to read, here's a story about a fisherman. It's like, okay, I get it, but, tell the story, paint the picture. It makes me wonder, and you can't help but wonder listening to this record, if really this was the type of record that really most showed off Billy Idol's songwriting talent, which I do think that Billy Idol is a great songwriter. I don't necessarily think that he's a great science fiction writer, but I do kind of like this song. If you're going to write a song about surviving, in a post-apocalyptic sort of world scenario, you might also want to leave out some of like the generic rock tropes, about chasing around young pelt. But all in all, that being said, I actually kind of like the song Tomorrow People. So I'm going to put that one in the yes column, just because it is interesting. I do like Billy Idol's voice a lot on it. The guitar playing is a little cringe, but it's not bad. The next song after that is probably my favorite song on the record, which is Adam in Chains. I genuinely think that this is a great song. Of course, it famously opens up with the sort of 3.5 minute guided meditation, but I really love it. I think that this is a song that is probably the high point on the record, at least in my opinion. There's a couple songs on this record that I really think are the high points on this record. To me, this is probably my favorite song. There was also a single and a video for Adam in Chains. This is a song, actually, I don't know how you would produce this song live, now, but this is a song I actually wouldn't mind seeing live at some point in time. So I'm going to put that one. That one is easily in the yes column as far as I'm concerned. The next song after that is a song called New Romancer. This song is pretty bland. It's got like a sort of a chintzy techno backdrop with some extra syrupy guitar work, thrown in for good measure. I do love the opening lyric, discovered love in the rancid days of ruin. I actually do like that. Just because we're being exposed to, this absolute living hell, doesn't mean that you can't go out and pursue a little bit of rug. I think that is the underlying message in this song. When I was younger, I thought that the lyrics to this song were just like the jugs. I thought it was like very deep and well written, and I do think, lyrically speaking, I do think it's one of the better songs on the record. It's a very nostalgic song for me on the record. I remember when I was younger and I was a super fan of Billy Idol, I thought, whoa, man, look at those words that guy just strung together right there. So that one's going to go in the yes column. And right now the yeses have it 3-2, just so you are aware. The next song after that is a song called Power Junkie. Really, the only good thing you could say about this song is that the song kicks off with a sample of Muhammad Ali. Apart from that, this song is pretty rough, and it has arguably one of the most cringe lyrics on the entire record, which is "Suck on my love meat, now suck on my steed." I'm not sure what you're trying to convey there, Bill, but unfortunately the song Power Junkie is probably, in my opinion, next to Shock to the System, arguably the weakest song on the record. So for me, that one's going to go in the no column. The next song after that is called Love Labors On. To me, this is very overproduced, sort of bland techno backbeat with some more, guitar wizardry by Mark Younger Smith, if you want to call it that. To me, this song is neither here nor there. It is just really boring. It doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really say anything lyrically, and so for me, I'm going to put that one in the no. It's not that it's, like I said, it's not that it's like a bad song. It's just a song that, if you're going to trim some of the fat off this record, which I wouldn't say that this, record has a ton of fat. It's not overly long, but, this is a song you could have just easily left off. The next song after that is the song Heroin, which, to me, this is what happens when you have a producer that is too much of a yes man. I completely blame Robin Hancock for this one. I imagine, Billy Idol coming into the studio very excited, and he tells you he wants to combine elements. He wants to combine some really tinsely, cheap techno backbeat with songs by the Velvet Underground and Patti Smith. We're going to slap it together. We're going to make a really cheesy music video to go along with it. At this point in time, Robin Hancock, as producer, it is your responsibility to say, you know what, Bill, I see what you're saying, but I don't think we're going to go in that direction with this song. I mean, this is arguably maybe one of the worst cover songs of all time. And again, I say this as a young person. When I was really obsessed with Billy Idol, I loved this song. This was one I really had to defend against people because, of course, the Velvet Underground and Patti Smith are seen as being pretty sacred characters in the history of music. And for this song, which this song sort of borders on blasphemous. I mean, I am a huge Velvet Underground fan. I've never really cared that much for Patti Smith. Shut up. The only reason why you say you love Patti Smith so much is because you think you're supposed to. But man, I am just the hugest. I'm a huge Velvet Underground fan. And part of me wishes I could have seen Lou Reed's face the first time he heard this song. This song was a bad idea from the start, and what's funny was, of course, this was one of the singles for the record. There was a video for this at one point in time. I don't have it anymore, but there was a maxi single released of the Heroin song, and it had not only the album studio version, but it also had like 5 or 6 just equally putrid remixes. Even for me back then, I couldn't listen to that very often. So sadly, that one is going in the no column. I mean, again, sometimes you gotta stand up to these guys and be like, I don't think this is a good idea, man. The next song after that is a song called Shangri-La. It's okay. I actually like it. It's got kind of an Indian, Middle Eastern kind of vibe. Lyrically, I don't hate it. And also, I don't really get it. I don't really get what the lyrics are about. But I think that on this song, again, this is something that, Billy Idol is kind of working out of his element as a songwriter. Because I like the song and I do like the lyrics, but they don't really mean anything. I feel like this is like an attempt for him to create something, purposely artsy and abstract. I'm going to give the song a yes, because I do actually like the song Shangri-La. I think mostly I kind of dig the instrumentation on it. I kind of like the electronic sounding sort of Middle Eastern Indian influence. I like that. The next song is Concrete Kingdom Probably the most anonymous song on the record. To me, the song sounds like every techno song I've ever heard. Now, I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, I am by no means an electronic music or techno music expert. I realize, even saying the word techno, how uncool I sound even saying that. But I'll give this song a yes, just because it's not bad. It isn't, offensive. But it's just very anonymous. It is much better than heroin. So if you're if that's sort of the benchmark at this point in time, I'll give it a better than that. The next song after that might actually be another one of my two favorite songs on the record. I think Adam in Chains is my favorite, but the song Venus is another song I actually really like. I like this song instrumentally, minus the guitar playing. Again, Mark Younger Smith is not really my guy. Like I asked earlier, would Steve Stevens have done a better job on this record? Would Steve Stevens have even touched this record? It's hard to say. I think really the guitar playing on this record or on this song is the only thing I don't like about it. It's a tune about, hunting down some carpet. Again, it's okay. It's Billy Idol. That's what he does. Billy Idol is like a sex machine. So I'm going to give that song a yes. Not too bad. Actually really good. I like that song. The next song after that is called Then the Night Comes. This song features backing vocals by both Carney and Wendy Wilson. There's 2 strikes against you to start with. Way too much generic guitar playing on this song. Lyrically, I think that this song is, it's pretty good. But I think the oversaturation of bad guitar and the Carney and Wendy Wilson backing vocals make this song very skippable, very hard not to want to skip. So we're actually tied right now, 6-6, with the yeses and nos. So this is the tiebreaker right here, the last song on the record. It's called Mother Dawn. This song features incredible backing vocals by Durga McBroom. Now, where Carney and Wendy Wilson completely whiff, in my opinion, on their backing vocals. I love the backing vocals on Mother Dawn. I actually really like this song. It's a nice way to close out the album. Instrumentally, I like this song. There is a little bit of cheese in the guitar playing, but it isn't quite as offensive as some of the stuff earlier on the record. So I'm going to give this one a yes, which means that the yeses take it 7-6. So there you go. Cyberpunk is a passable record for the most part. Of course, after this record came out, Billy Idol took this record on tour. And again, I said this before, I will say it again. I really admire the fact that Billy Idol, when he, released this record, he really was going against the current of what was popular, at least in mainstream radio and MTV. And if you remember anything from the Cyberpunk tour, of course, Billy Idol grew his hair out long. I don't know if you would describe his hair so much as being dreads, although I could see why you would describe it as being dreads. It was more like these long, kind of like twists things. And he had this whole cyberpunk aesthetic. There's actually, if you go back on YouTube, you can find a pretty interesting appearance of him on the Arsenio Hall show back during the cyberpunk era. Now, those of us of a certain age, back in those days, Arsenio Hall was the coolest, easily, of the late night talk show cats back in those days. But, at the end of the day, I think the Cyberpunk tour ended up, sort of derailing, much like the record did. And I do know for a fact that Billy Idol cut the Cyberpunk tour short and more or less kind of went into, hiding after this whole Cyberpunk debacle. I mean, there are records that underperform. There are records that bomb, and then there are records that are career suicide. And sadly, I think for Billy Idol, because I am such a huge fan, I think he's such an interesting, remarkable talent. I think he's such a likable character. It really is sort of sad in a way that this record just really, sunk his ship at the time. Like I said, in 1993, there was really nothing less cool you could be than Billy Idol, especially somebody who, coming from the 1980s, which were officially dead by that point in time, and somebody who, and I love the guy, I'm not saying this to be disparaging at all, but somebody who at times could come across as a little bit cartoony. It was very uncool during the height of the, misery-laden grunge years. It really wasn't until 2005 that Billy Idol really began his comeback. I mean, now Billy Idol is huge. You go see Billy Idol play live. He draws huge crowds. People really are really into Billy Idol again. It's very, it's very heartwarming, especially because in the mid-90s, when I was such a huge fan, I wondered if he was ever going to come back from this at a certain point in time. But in 2005, he released a record called Devil's Playground, which I do like. I actually, think that, Cyberpunk is maybe even a little bit more interesting, at least, than that one. But he did have the sense to reunite with Steve Stevens. He's put out another record since then called Kings and Queens of the Underground, which I thought was okay. I definitely think that Devil's Playground, of the two post-Cyberpunk records, is better, and they are all better than both Charmed Life and Billy Idol's Christmas record. Now, I get it if you like Christmas music. I'm not particularly a big fan. I can listen to Christmas music about 2 or 3 days on either side of the holiday. Beyond that, I can't take hardly any of it. So, Billy Idol singing Silver Bells is something that I'll take a pass on most of the time. Anyway, it's nothing personal, Bill. I do love you. And I went back and listened to your Cyberpunk this week. Did enjoy it. It was interesting to hear it again through sort of a different set of ears than I used to listen to it with back in the 1990s, and probably bigger ears. If my grandfather was any indication, my ears are probably going to be touching my shoulders in the next 4 or 5 years anyway. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back every week for Morrissey Monday, my weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content throughout the week. Go back and check out Billy Idol's Cyberpunk. It is definitely not as good as I remember it, but I can almost guarantee that it's not as bad as you remember it. Anyway, until next time, my friends, I'll talk to you then.